Welcome to today's lesson. Today we're going to look at the Earth as a system and the components that make it up. So when we look at the Earth, sometimes it helps to make a comparison with something we know. So the Earth is a system made of many different parts, just like this bridge here. You'll notice there's cables to hold on to here, planks to walk on, and cables underneath to support them. The Earth has the same types of system to support life. And if any of these systems give way, things just don't work. So imagine for a second if this cable below just snapped, how difficult it would be to hang on and try to get across this bridge. So let's look at some of those systems. So when we look at the Earth, the three major components is our atmosphere, which of course has oxygen and other gases we need for life. The lithosphere, where we just kind of look down, that's really the Earth that we're walking on, and the hydrosphere, which is the liquid portion of the Earth. So this is what we call our biosphere. It's the sphere that supports life on the Earth, and that's really where living things live, from the bottom of the ocean all the way up to the highest points of the atmosphere that supports life. So within the biosphere, there are ecosystems. Ecosystems can be gigantic, from hundreds of square miles, or they could be a size of a puddle. Now what an ecosystem is a series of parts, both living and non-living, that interact together. So the life, the plants, the animals, all the stuff that might live in this forest, and then how those parts relate to each other along with the non-living parts of the environment, such as the air, temperature, amount of water, sunlight, things like that. These living and non-living components are often referred to as biotic and abiotic components. Every system has these. Biotic, that is, are the living components down here. So our trees, our flowers, insects, all of those things that you would consider living. Abiotic are non-living parts, and they were never alive. So water is not living, and it's considered abiotic. Rocks, geology. When we look at the chemistry of the land, the pH of the water, how much oxygen is it? Is it like a swamp that's a very low oxygen environment? Precipitation, things like that are considered abiotic, and these two components have to work together in an ecosystem. Now the next step is what's called biomes, and biomes are composed of several different ecosystems. There's a large variety of biomes. We're going to cover just a few of them here. But the things you need to understand is that biomes can be anywhere on Earth. They can be dry, they can be wet, they can contain a huge variety of life. So if we look up here, here's a desert biome that's extremely dry, not much water, very high temperatures and extremes in temperatures in these biomes. So the creatures, plants, and animals that live here are going to be uniquely adapted to that specific climate. And that's what really separates a biome from an ecosystem. Biomes have specific climates, whereas down here you look at a grassland where you notice there's no large trees. You might have a couple small shrubs, but for the most part, grass is your dominant plant species. Tundra, where you have these extremely cool environments. In many cases, they're extremely high up. Plants are growing slow. You have marine environments, which are incredibly productive environments with all sorts of plants and animals and arthropods and things like that. And then you even have forested biomes, which we're very familiar with, trees and forest. So there's a lot of different types of biomes, and the climate and the creatures and communities that live there are what separates those out. So when we look at these biomes, we have individual creatures within those biomes, and we sometimes call those species. A species is a simplest form of a living thing in general that can reproduce with other members of that species. So here's a clownfish, and clownfish can breed with other clownfish. This rule is pretty standard in most of biology, but there's a few exceptions, but that's for another lesson. We also call any living thing an organism. So it could be a tree, oh, that's an organism. It could be an ant, that's an organism. So that's a pretty generic term. So we say organisms live in ecosystems. Now, if we were to take a group of these species, say clownfish, and multiply them out 6 times, you'd have what's called a population. And then that population, if we took a bunch of populations like clownfish and yellow tangs and tube worms and put them together, then we wind up coming up with what's called a community. And this is really where we look at how these different things interact within an ecosystem.